Okay, thank you very much indeed, Anna. So, moving on to Chris. So, Chris has a combination of skills that allows him to delve in depth into areas of music and HCI that few artists, researchers, developers, practitioners can reach. So, certainly, he writes music for TV, radio, live performance installations, and BBC projects. Um, he's a highly skilled programmer and architect, and that allows him to do things as a researcher, like he created a DAW and a plugin that allowed him to do a study with over 1,000 DAW users, a study with more HCI depth than most of us were able to achieve in most of our projects. So he's developed a range of technology projects for Steinberg, Yamaha, BT, BBC, and a range of startups. Stemming from his PhD a long time ago, he's got serious expertise in flow, virtuosity, creativity, liveness. He has a day job as a senior lecturer in music technology at UWE. As well as doing all these things, he's been working on diverse music and HCI projects spanning spatial audio, MIR, VR, AI. But one of the most long running and arguably intriguing projects concerns music programming for the masses. So over to Chris.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon and Tom, for the invitation. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many people. Yeah, let me share my screen. I've got 30 minutes basically to talk about the Manhattan project, which is a 10-year project. So this is going from a new project and Anna's fantastic work to one that's been going a while. And I'm going to talk about kind of where I sit, which is kind of like halfway between academia and professional software development. And I'm going to talk about this project, which started in academia and was published at NIME 10 years ago, and how I've managed to sustain it and maintain it and grow it once you get beyond that kind of honeymoon period in academia itself. So here's the plan. So it's all started at NIME, and for a lot of my academic research, NIME is the nexus for my field of study. It's one of the most impactful conferences, and it's a marvelous interdisciplinary space. But it's also about, well, new interfaces for musical expression, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that word "new." Basically, what happens when an interface is not new anymore. I'll have very briefly talk about who I am and why I'm looking at these things and why I'm interested in these things. But I'm going to spend most of my time talking about Manhattan. And so Manhattan is the project that Simon mentioned, which is about introducing programming to mainstream computer music practice. And it's got a lot of offshoots apart from that. So I'll talk a bit about the design of the program, but also the project itself. And how it's been used, the kind of milestones over the 10 years, the challenges, and hopefully there'll be time at the end to kind of share some kind of tips or rather lessons learned through the project. If you're maintaining or developing a new innovative tool and you want to get it out there to have an impact on mainstream practice beyond academia. So I'm going to assume that we're all familiar with New Interfaces for Musical Expression NIME conference. It is an absolutely fantastic conference. It's an offshoot of one of the most impactful HCI conferences and research venues in the world, CHI. And it started in 2001. And it's just a wonderful interdisciplinary space with art, technology, psychology, sociology, and it does a very, very good job of bridging artistic practice and academic research. And it's, especially recently, it's a very respected and rigorous research medium. It's got a huge international community. I'm sure we're all familiar with this. Maybe you even heard about this talk through the NIME mailing list. However, if you go to NIME, it is a wonder, especially if it's your first time there. There's a lot of new tools. They're amazing, but they're all prototypes. They're all new, okay? How good would a violin sound if the player had only spent 10 months with it rather than 10 years with it. So there's relatively little opportunity for in-depth user studies. The concerts themselves are almost pilot concerts because there isn't that kind of time to develop virtuosity, nor repertoire for all of these new instruments for them to be adopted to have a kind of conservatoire and teaching approach with them. And one thing, my interest has always been, I'm a terrible performer. My interest has always been on composition and kind of non-real-time musical expression. And so NIME is very much about live music performance and new instruments. So the question is, and you hear this talked about at NIME quite a lot, all of these fantastic ideas, how many of them actually have a main impact on mainstream digital music practice? And when I talk about that, I'm talking about if you speak to someone who does computer music, what are they using? Well, they're using sequences and DAWs, and they're producing in studios and things like that. That kind of research gets very little in the way because NIME is all about newness. So my philosophy is more not NIME. So not new interfaces for musical expression, which is a complementary approach, basically, where a lot of my research looks at existing computer music practices, like Simon described, looking at sequencer and DAW users, longitudinal studies, looking at the development of skill over a long period of time. I'm also very interested in developing new tools, but I want those tools to integrate with existing creative processes. If you have a technology that requires a musician to abandon their accumulated skills and experience, it's not going to be adopted because they have spent so much and invested so much in developing those skills that they are not going to want to spend another 10 years abandoning them and developing something new. And a lot of the most successful instruments at NIME are augmented instruments that allow you to transfer those kind of skills. But there's a lot of gaps in the research. It's rarely do we get to look at real world use or mainstream use. General problem in HDI research is we don't look at learning. We actually look at usability techniques to obviate learning. So you just make it so that you can use it without actually having to spend time mastering it. But in creativity, mastering is quite a good thing. We don't look at, the beyond the prototype stage. How do you get something to be public ready for mass consumption? And how do you develop a community around your technologies? How do you get critical mass? How do you get users who start making content, teachers who start teaching your tools, and people who evangelize new ways of doing things and try to change the way we do mainstream music practice? One of the big challenges in going beyond the prototype stage is sustaining a project because there's very little academic funding for that. It's about what's new, what's relevant, the funding ends, and then that's done. So that's kind of one of the things that I'll talk about when I talk about Manhattan. I don't really need to talk too much about myself. That's such a wonderful introduction from Simon. Thank you very much. But yeah, I kind of have multiple perspectives. That I'm a practitioner. I make music, and I'm a professional developer. So I make more than prototypes. I also do quality assurance and testing and consulting for startups. And I run, more recently, my own non-profit organization, which is about developing software to support learning and creativity in music technology. That's Nash Audio. A lot of my passion comes from learning because I see it as a form of creativity. You're creating knowledge. And that's where a lot of my research lies, is that how can we teach existing practitioners new skills? And yeah, I'm kind of very, very interested in digital creativity and HDI. So there's some references there. You'll notice that I look at a lot of existing technologies and production processes. And even when I design a new interface, I made a velocity sensitive QWERTY keyboard, for crying out loud. But I'm here to talk about Manhattan. And I'm not going to talk about it too much because I don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to leave you, hopefully, to be intrigued and to go forth and investigate it. But in a nutshell, Manhattan is a sequencer that is capable of expressing everything you can do with a traditional MIDI sequencer or DAW, with an integrated programming language. And when I say it's an integrated programming language, it's slightly different from Max for Live, which is integrated into a DAW. The programming language is part of the music. The idea here is that you have a sequencer, and then the user can add piecewise at their own pace more or less code functionality, procedural functionality. And the other goal was to integrate this with a creative process, existing creative processes. So the technology works as a standalone program, but also as a plugin that people can add into their DAWs so that they can use it as part of their existing digital audio or music practices. More recently, it's also the engine itself, the procedural engine, has been kind of spun out as something you can embed in other programs, including computer games for procedural game music. It's been used because it's got that kind of relevance to real-world music and mainstream music. I use it to introduce my students who are musicians to computer programming. So I teach computational thinking through this as a way of softening the blow when we teach them C++. Which they don't necessarily want to learn on day one. And the approach you'll notice is very similar to spreadsheets, and so it inherits a lot of the advantages of that, and it makes for a low threshold introduction to coding. It has that high threshold expressivity of everything you can do with sequencing, plus almost everything you can do with procedurally generated music. It originally started as an effort to kind of recognize that there's a disjunction in music practice and mainstream practice, which is sequencer-based and editing and data-oriented and fixed and static and linear, and music programming, which is far more abstract. It's process-oriented. Your data's hidden. It's in memory. And so looking for a way to kind of combine these and not just, have both together, but a continuum that you can move between one and the other. I really like this this graph from 2004, which looks at the different metaphors for programming languages and what makes a programming language ideal for the end user. Well, you want it to be human-centric rather than computer-centric, but you want to balance that kind of concreteness with what they're working on the data, with the power of abstraction that comes from working with code. So in 2014, I updated this to annotate it with various music technologies, which share these metaphors, basically. And, spreadsheets stand out as one of those very, very effective end-user programming systems. And so effectively what I've done is I've taken my sequencer that I've been developing for 10 years beforehand and said, it's a spreadsheet. So let's turn it into a programming language. Why are spreadsheets so successful? Well, because for start, they're an editing environment where you see the data. Okay, you're always in view of the thing that matters to you, and it's actually the code that's hidden. But what it means is you write some code and you see the result of the code instantly and how it affects the data. So it becomes very easy to understand the code. You get the instant feedback of an edit. You also can use code as little or as much as you like. So it is a very low threshold. You don't even have to use code to use a spreadsheet, but then you can have a very gradual, scalable improvement in this, the complexity of what you do, and you can do some pretty amazing things in Excel. So here's the key things. It's the data visibility that's really important. It's formulas, which is an easy introduction to code. And as we'll see, there's this other feature, which is the rectilinear grid. The grid itself is actually a very, very important aspect of the success of spreadsheets, but also of Manhattan. And partly that's because you can use a grid and address everything in that grid really, really concisely and really, really easily. So here you go. This is what Manhattan is. You can see in the background there is effectively a table, which is a grid of music. Time is going down. You've got cells which have notes in them. And of course, just like a spreadsheet, you can put in that cell, you can either just write the note you want in, enter it manually, or you can type in a formula to decide what it is. And there's a battery of different examples there. So you inherit the same flexibility as formulas in spreadsheets. By, someone could manually sequence a piece of music in a traditional sense, and then just add one formula to randomize something. Okay, and that is their first step in code taken. It's a really, really easy one. You don't have to set up an environment. It's not going to crash. It might sound bad, but it's not going to crash. And then you can kind of build up from there because it's really simple primitives that you can combine together. The data is visible, so you're always looking at the music and you're never far away from being able to listen to it because you can just move the cursor there and play it. And it's a very important part of my earlier research on how you support flow in music software. You need a rapid edit audition feedback cycle. And you don't tend to have that with code. Quite often you write the code, you build it, and then you run it. That's quite slow and cumbersome. This is literally a sequencer that you can hit play on the keyboard and hear your code seconds after you've written it. The code itself is hidden, which is not necessarily a strength or anything, except it might not scare people on first viewing, but it does mean that maybe its functionality or its role is not clear. So one of the things that is kind of really well received by users is we use arcs to show where data comes from. When you can reference to another cell or something like that, an arc shows you where that is. And what that means is you can watch a piece of music playing and suddenly realize, oh, that's how music's structured. Okay, it's all patterns and repeats, and that's depending on that. And it's actually quite a beautiful visualization of music, especially when you can reduce a 12-minute piece of music down to a repeating bar that just kind of rewrites itself on every iteration. Different from spreadsheets, there's an explicit model of time. So you actually get the cells executed in order, and you're able to situate the code in the actual score of the music. So in other words, rather than data flow or other languages where time is quite an abstract quantity and it might be a stream, you actually have that same kind of orientation and reference that you would have in a digital audio workstation. And there's that grid again. And that's where the name Manhattan comes from. It's rectilinear distance in computer science. It's called Manhattan distance. And so that was what the name came from. Obviously, there's a slightly darker joke on the Manhattan Project itself, but this is a weapon of mass creation. But it's actually one of the key strengths that enables Manhattan to be as successful as it is, because it's you can address all the music anywhere in the music very, very easily and concisely, which is actually a lot harder if you think about the score and how you might address different events and choose different events. And unfortunately, that makes it quite difficult to translate this formula idea to anything that doesn't have a grid. So it's kind of some of the research now is about looking about how I expand that and generalize that. But the bottom line is you can use this environment if you want to sequence music. You can use this environment if you want to generate music entirely, and everything in between, from simple randomizations to live input or interactive input and things like that. Right, a very quick demo. Here's the environment, and everyone can see that, I hope. And I've opened up this cell up here, and you can see there's a little formula in there that looks at the repeat we're on. If it's the first repeat, we're going to copy the cell from row 0, otherwise we're going to leave it blank, and the result is this. The other cells here just basically copy from that particular cell. And so the program has a comprehensive curriculum that teaches computer science ideas through often familiar pieces of music. And this is obviously loops and if statements. So I'll just very quickly do this one here. And so this is if chorus is the third repeat. This is going to be a G, else it's going to stick with its F. And so on. Obviously, there's also quite a high ceiling because it allows you to do a lot of things that you can't do in kind of linear digital audio workstations. Obviously, it can metamorphose the piece, but you can do a lot of weird parallel and polytympanic timpy type stuff. And so on. Right. So what I want to spend the rest of the session talking about basically is 10 years of the project. Okay. So the initial prototype was developed at the end of 2013 and published at NIME in 2014 with some user studies, which are all very positive. But let's set some context. I didn't create the whole thing one Christmas holiday. It is based on a previous piece of software, a sequencer that I developed for the previous 10 years, and that allowed me to bring basically a fully capable sequencer as the basis for adding procedural functionality. It's heavily informed by my prior research on flow and learning and notation-mediated music interaction. They're kind of basically it's design principles for designing software to, well, in some cases to get people addicted, but ultimately to motivate them to want to learn more and engage more deeply. And some other context here as well. I'm obviously personally motivated by this project. I'm trying to solve digital literacy problems and teach people to learn to code. So it's non-profit. It does have open formats, but it is closed source. And it's closed source largely because it's an extension of a closed source project, Revisit, but also this is how I will be sustaining financially the project by having a freemium model where for all kind of social enterprise applications, it's free, but professionals, rich kids and benefactors can donate to upgrade the program. Right. Two other contexts for the last 10 years, which you know about. The pandemic, yeah, not a great kind of context to develop the project is, and particularly ironic, as you'll see in a second. And even worse than that, I was program leader for 4 years and was running the course. And that basically means you have no time for anything whatsoever. So I'm free of that now. So one of the principal focuses has been on using Manhattan to teach musicians, computer musicians, who have never programmed before, the concept of computer science and coding. So in 2015, after the initial kind of tests, I started piloting teaching sessions that gradually grew up to a week of teaching and then 4 weeks of teaching, and ultimately got integrated with the formal curriculum at UE Bristol. That continued for a long while, but one of the watershed moments was when I did an internship with Corey, who's here today, to basically, part of it was testing the expressive scope of what Manhattan could do, and part of it was seeing, well, what would be a good summative assessment for students. And the idea with an étude is that you use Manhattan to do a study of an existing piece of music as code. So you had people who chose ABBA, Stravinsky, Jimi Hendrix, Sting, Steve Reich, and they would basically recompose it in Manhattan as a single pattern, sometimes a single bar, that basically uses code to generate the piece in combination with patterns of music. It's proved to be a very successful project. So yeah, Corey himself did Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, Jimi Hendrix Voodoo Child, some really amazing works by students. And one of the things is that they tend to exceed their brief. They get into it so much, they go deeper that even when I ask for 30 seconds, they hand in 12 minutes. So it's a really good test of what's expressible in Manhattan in terms of music. And actually, I think that the étude model could be a good general test of procedural and algorithmic technologies more widely. Some Efforts after that were to simplify and shorten some of the lessons so that you could use them for younger audiences, because one of the other goals is to improve diversity and widen participation in code. And that is, you've got to make them fun, you've got to make them short, and you've got to make them relatively simple, and you've got to tailor, unfortunately, to the modern visual learning style. So that was a particularly successful way of engaging with secondary schools and kind of introducing the bug for code, basically. And this is, or all this material and all this has gradually led to a wider use of the environment, which is now in Huddersfield and Plymouth and UE Bristol, but is actually kind of reached its ultimate expression in a new music systems engineering course that's being developed at Point Blank Music School in London. So this is a course I've developed with the school, and the whole first year basically acknowledges that digital literacy has fallen just a little bit in young people, and we need to address that. And when we start teaching them, they're not ready to learn C++ or even programming necessarily in the first day. So we have a whole module on computational thinking using Manhattan, then a module on signal processing using a simplified version of C++. This is another project that I'm doing, which I probably won't have time to talk about today, but do see my talk at the Audio Developer Conference this November, in a couple of weeks' time. And then the students after that are ready to try to tackle C++. So the course launches next year. Of course, I've also been using it for artistic projects. I've been doing workshops with artists, and major installations. So BBC Music Day took over Bristol Temple Meads Station, used AI to track all the objects on the platform, and then throughout the day used those to feed data into Manhattan and generate music in popular mainstream styles. So classical pieces of music and trip hop pieces of music. They're not soundscapes, but actually arrangements that were kind of, oh, that's interesting, and everyone could see their agency in the crowd. I'd be interested actually to adapt the system for forests after hearing Anna's talk. So yeah, that's led to kind of outings to science festivals, and there was to be an installation at the Philharmonia, the most expensive concert hall in the world, which sadly got affected by the pandemic. But there will now be a permanent installation of the crowd-driven music system in our new engineering building. So there's a multi-million-pound building that we're adding a multi-channel system to, which is permanently going to be playing crowd-driven and data-driven music into the space, hopefully in a positive way to foster learning rather than distract from it. So that's going to go live later this year. So the artist is going strong, but probably the killer application is games. So procedural music, it finds its ultimate expression in games where the context is always changing and the game needs to be able to write its music on the fly. And at the moment, let's be honest, the technologies are a little less unambitious. They are largely pre-recorded cross-fading clips and things like that. We don't do a lot with procedural music. We're doing a little bit more now, but Manhattan basically allows you to do everything you can do with the sequencer and let the game have control of that and live author that. So first expression of that was Ars Arcus, a game, like a tech demo. And here we go. So you're going to kill some guys, you're going to get some notes and drums in time and in key with the current tune. You can also see the soundtrack being played, which illustrates this kind of connection, the close integration between the soundtrack and the game itself. And what better way to do that than to start assaulting the musicians themselves? Make them a little more atonal. And so forth. Fun times. It's very nice building worlds. And I promise I don't really enjoy killing musicians. So launched that as a demo at the Global Game Jam in 2023, and I've recently done some student internships designing games and exploring what's possible when you have so much closer connection with music soundtrack. And what this is all building up to is the general public release of the software, which basically has been in the works since December. when it went onto Steam in early access. So if you want to play with the environment and nearly all the projects that you've seen today, just type Manhattan into Steam and you can download it for free, including the opportunity to kill flautists. So broadly, there's been 3 phases in the kind of 10-year. Okay, you've got your initial prototype. That's in academia. That's where the novelty is greatest. It's very easy to publish. Very limited use, very limited testing, not a lot of content, no critical mass, anything like that. So the challenge after that is to make it ready for market. Okay, and that's really, really difficult because there's no academic funding for quality assurance. Normally, what you'd do is you'd spin it out. You'd make it a commercial enterprise, but I didn't want to do that because my goal is for it to widen participation in code. So I want it to be free. So there is that difficulty of how you maintain the project, how you fund it, how you find the time for it. And ultimately, you've got to do side projects and find new novelty about the project and new ways in which it can be used in order to attract new funding, such as installations, new musical forms and things like that. But ultimately, over a period of several years, the design matures. The most important thing, however, if you're going to release to the public, is a focus on quality testing. It's by far the biggest part of software development. You could come up with a prototype in 20% of the time, and it will take you 80% of the time to make it actually robust enough to put in front of a user. So this period is gradually expanding the number of people who are using it, getting their feedback, fixing the bugs along the way. And then the other thing that happens is that as more people use it, more content gets developed. Documentation gets developed and repertoire, so that when it hits a user from the public looks at it and thinks, oh, okay, you can do that, you can do those amazing things, but there's also the route to get there. This all takes an incredibly long time. And testing software is hard. Actually, you arguably get a better salary as a test engineer than you do as a developer these days. The situation I'm in now is that I'm happy with the way the software is at. I'm ready for it to be used by the end users. And so we're switching over into support and maintenance. So that's still something that needs to be maintained. And so there's still effort there, and you need funding and there's costs and things like that. So you have to look at sustainability and income. And what that means is that I have to think about things like marketing it and pushing it and impact and monetizing it. As I say, the route to that will be a freemium model where people basically get the core package for free, but things like surround sound or professional license are paid for. And you need money as well, not only to maintain it, but to progress it and to add new features. But the hope, the good thing is that you will no longer be the steering, driving force of the community, that the content and interest and support will start being handled by the community itself. So I don't know how long I have left, but here are 10 quick tips that I picked up the hard way. When you design a programming language, you think, well, it's got a lot of uses. In fact, I can think of it being used in everything you do in music. That's a mistake. Don't spread yourself too thin. Think about what the target uses, who's going to be most interested in it, what's the killer application. And so crowd-driven music was a great initial expression, but game music is Manhattan's killer application. Plan your release. Okay, you must absolutely get real-world feedback. You are not going to get enough feedback from a controlled user study or a 20-minute session with 12 people in order to produce a kind of public-ready piece of software. Do a phased release. Control, put it to a list of developers and say, try this, then put it to a list of specialist users and try this, and then release it somewhere. And this is something I probably didn't do well enough, is get it out there as early as possible. It's taken me 10 years, basically, to get to the stage where I'm going to actively market it. And probably I could have benefited from doing that a little earlier. So you must have support in academia. You need to play the political game. And outside of academia, In academia, you need someone who says, oh, that's amazing, I can use that in this project, or we can use it to represent the university that way. Students are also fantastic support and amazing resources, especially if they get interested and they start exploring it and start surprising you in the way they're using your tools. After academia, you still need that support. You need early adopters, you need artists who are addicted to it and people who evangelize it. I haven't pushed it yet, so I'm not quite there yet. I've got a few artists, but that will be the push in the next few months. Don't chase perfection. You're not going to fix all the bugs, and you should know what features to add for version 1 and what you should add save for after version 1. And so, yeah, market, as in marketing and exposure as soon as possible. Just releasing it and expecting it to on the merit of how good an idea it is to go viral or to sell itself, that's not going to happen. You actually need to get dirty. You need to plug it, and you know, if the earlier you start, the more you'll build critical mass. It's always very difficult marketing projects. So if you're an engineer or in a technical school or something like that, you're probably quite dry, safety-driven, test-driven, and circumspect about how you describe things. And if you're in an arts and humanities school, you've got wondrous vision. And you've got to find somewhere in the middle between that of not over-promising and not underselling your project. You know, if you come across as look, it's perfect, I'm a multi-corporation, multi-international vendor, and they turn and say, oh, this version doesn't work, they're going to hate you, and they're not going to realize, oh yeah, you're just a small person who's been working on this, and they'll treat you as a corporation. So just be open and honest. Here's something I have absolutely not done enough, and you basically really need to engage with social media. I'm a Radio 4 listener. I thought bulletin board systems were advanced, and that's probably when I lost interest in the internet, to be honest. But it's the only way to reach a wider audience, and especially a younger audience. It's hard to do, but the one thing about it is don't apply Hollywood production standards to it. Candid, authentic, and lo-fi is actually much better received and much easier to produce. Don't spend too long developing it because it might be obsolete before you release it. Thankfully, I think I've dodged that. Okay. Expect things. This is a big thing. A lot of the work in maintaining a piece of software is just adapting to changes. So, you know, OS updates, API updates, mentioning no names, they all take a significant amount of work. And even if you're using Juice, juice changes can actually create real headaches. So learn automated testing, deployment, and continuous integration, and all those smart tactics, basically, to make keeping it working easy so you can work on adding new features. And the last one is look after yourself. It's hard and it's frustrating, commercial software development. And once you start designing for others and not for your own practice, it's difficult. It can be less motivating right up until you see what other people are using it for, and you kind of think, wow, that's cool, I didn't even know it could do that. Remember why you started the project. Try to use your tech yourself. Take regular breaks, 20 minutes during sessions, but a week, you know, if you're working for yourself, it's an independent project or anything like that, you need to take a week off. You won't be productive. But maybe take a year off, get it to a nice state, let it kind of fester for a year or grow for a year. In software development, crunch is a big problem. It's the overworking before a deadline. Very, very easy to do when you're working for yourself or you're working to a particular release. And don't lose heart. A single bug can disproportionately undermine your confidence in your entire code base. And it's just, you know, that will fade. You will regain confidence in it, unless, of course, you've really messed it up. If the project becomes too much, don't end it. Open source it. Thank you very much. Hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that's interesting. Hopefully you'll be intrigued to find out more about the project. Some YouTube links should you wish to. So if anyone has any questions.
So very definitely, does anybody have any questions? So I've got a kind of nerdy old school question, but I'll just wait to see if anyone else is popping up with a question.
There is one from Andrea in the chat.
Ah, great. Why am I not seeing that in the chat? Ah, here we go.
Ah, it is.
Okay, so Andrea's saying, Chris, I'm a music tracker fan. This is a tracker on steroids, indeed. So you got me there, line, hook, and sinker. My question would be, people have been using SonicPy for a while to teach programming, and it's a much more literal translation in music environment to text-based programming languages. So I wonder what's your take on the difference of approach when it comes to moving students over to text-based programming?
So that's part of Manhattan. So I just introduced the formulas. You can actually switch over to multi-line code and a more imperative style in the cells. It's actually part of what we're developing on Muse. We'll start with this. We'll teach all the concepts like if, then, else, and repeats and so forth. And then what we actually do to segue into C++ is a project I'm developing called Klang, which is a dialect for C++ that allows you to write in modern C++ for it, but be a bit more kind of signal flow driven, a bit more role expressive. So in terms of when Manhattan sits, there's kind of like it's a general introduction to computational thinking. With SonicPy, the difference between that and Manhattan is that I look at it as SonicPy is music put into code, and Manhattan is code put into music. I think, Sam's work, actually, I was there at the beginning working with Sam, and it's an absolutely fantastic project. It's wonderful for live coding and things like that. I think the problem is that it's so divorced from traditional computer music practice or composition or arrangement on a timeline that some people find it hard to get to. So it's not so much I'm trying to get people into text-based programming. I'm trying to get people who wouldn't even think of programming into programming. I have to say that a lot of the Manhattan language is actually quite C inspired. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Question from Matthias there.
Yeah, thanks very much. Also, thank you very much, Chris, for your for the overview of your of your work and what you have done so far. And I noticed that you are very experienced in terms of HCI and user experience, UX, and so on. And I wonder what your opinion is on compiling all these ideas that you had, or which led to this final product of Manhattan. What do you think about compiling those ideas as patterns in the old Alexander way? It doesn't have to be any low-level code patterns, but maybe high-level things. Have you ever thought about this, or what is your opinion in general?
I don't know where Manhattan came from. If I'm honest, it came from the fact that at one Christmas, I looked at my piece of software and thought, that looks like a spreadsheet. I wonder what will happen if I add formulas. Oh my God, it's actually quite capable of quite a lot. But it's actually the kind of philosophical basis now is I'm increasingly thinking of music in general as the synthesis of pattern and process. And I think what we have is technologies that are based on articulating processes and technologies that are based on articulating patterns, and few that allow you to do the both. What I'd like to do is to find some way to generalize that beyond the tracker paradigm to be able to get in that kind of intersection into kind of like Dorico or score editors and digital audio workstations. And I actually had a student once, a PhD student, who looked at how you get generative music into a DAW. And the trouble is he didn't have access to a DAW source code. So he had to write his own DAW and then studied it in situ. But I think what we need is kind of a richer access for plugins to be able to add functionality beyond effects processing and synthesis to a digital audio workstation, much more along the lines of Max for Live, and make it adaptable. I don't. Did that answer your question?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I don't know if what I meant with patterns was about programming patterns.
Oh, right.
And so on, not musical patterns whatsoever. But what is the idea? You have this large project. Yeah, you want to you want to teach. You want to teach people with. But would it be also interesting to bring out all these ideas as programming or interaction patterns and whatsoever to benefit or inform other developers?
No, 100%. Yes. I think kind of like on a meta research level, this talk forced me to think a lot about that almost for the first time, and realize that my experiences in this project, and they're not unique, and there's a lot of overlap with things like software design patterns, and especially anti-patterns, which is kind of like, well, when you're in the middle of a project and the code starts smelling, that kind of thing, what do you do? And I think there's a lot of at the start of this project, there was a lot of publishing I did on the academic area, and then kind of events overtook. There's a lot of publishing I still need to do, but definitely the kind of like guide to technology adoption, and especially my perspective is, because it's slightly unique, is non-profit technology adoption. I think, yeah, I would be beneficial if I could share some of that. I'm related to other practice as well. Please drop me an email if you are interested. I'd like to talk about this a lot more.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So I think we'll have just a couple more questions, and then we'll go to a 5-minute break. But I'm gonna ask two schizophrenically both ludicrous questions. So the first one is, I think everyone who sees Manhattan gets the idea that you could, everyone very quickly gets the idea that you can have expressions in a spreadsheet, right? But then as you develop from there, I don't think it's obvious to people how you deal with, if you like, containers, containment, repetition. It seems to me there's choice there in cognitively how you communicate that. So my question number one is, what choice did you have in how to communicate that sort of cognitively? But I'm just going to quickly say question number two, which is, as you know, there's a bunch of people at Microsoft and elsewhere digging down in spreadsheets, because everybody said, whoa, spreadsheets, end user programming, how can we push that? So the second question is there a line of research here where you get people into music with Manhattan and then kind of get people deeper into spreadsheets as... Anyway, so those are my two ridiculous questions, basically.
Okay, well, Excel is certainly a gateway drug to Manhattan, but I've never thought of it in the reverse. But your first question is a really good one. It's basically, because I've designed it around simple primitives, it's quite a low level of abstraction. And so how do you then scale that up to more complicated and complex expressions? Abstraction management, basically. So there are different parts of the language and additions that I've made, the ability to have functions to group code, label code, and things like that. But this is something I was reflecting on quite early on, is because the code is distributed amongst the pattern and situated in time somewhat arbitrarily, it is fundamentally and possibly literally an unstructured programming language. And so, like early versions of BASIC, it lacks that inherent correctness, well-formedness, and things like that. And I used to just cite, there was this 1984 paper which said unstructured programming languages are ideal for creative minds because they have unstructured minds. So I like that one, but it's a bit of a cheat. No, it's definitely basically I tried to bring in all different forms of programming languages. So going from the spreadsheet and adding a timeline, you go from a declarative to an imperative language. And then I've added things in aspects of functional languages and object-oriented programming that I will further develop, especially as people's ambitions get larger and larger. Then the other one is, can Manhattan be used to train office workers? Almost certainly. What I like, so my favorite anecdote is I went to St. John's College. I did my PhD in Revisit, which is effectively the musical spreadsheet. And I'm a huge fan of Douglas Adams. In Dirk Gently, he had a character who went to St. Ced's College, which was really St. John's College, his alma mater, and did something interesting with spreadsheets and music. And he set up a spin-out company called WayForward Technologies, which was designed to turn disappointing financial results and quarterly results into nice pieces of music to soften the blow. So, you know, I'm certainly game for that. And there's more than enough grim financial information out there at the moment. But it is the same idea. And I think actually a lot of the ideas that you learn are generic computational thinking ideas. There's absolutely no reason why you couldn't do your accounts in Manhattan. And I have even seen people write digital audio workstations in Excel with VBA. It's nuts, but it is impressive. And it just goes to show the kind of flexibility and versatility of tabulated data and number data. It's you can use it for secondary notation, for representing a lot of different things and any amount of data. So absolutely, it'd be interesting to get it on the European computer driving license.
Okay, so I don't know what Tom's thinking at the